Charles Julius Guiteau is remembered as the man who assassinated President James A. Garfield in 1881. His story, however, began decades earlier in an unsettled household in Illinois. He struggled with rejection, delusion, and repeated failure in nearly every field he entered. His life shows how personal pain, mental illness, and social pressures can combine to produce tragedy. No one is born evil. Guiteau's path shows how choices and pressures pushed him toward an act that shocked the United States. On July 2, 1881, President James Abram Garfield entered the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad Station in Washington, D.C. He planned to travel to New Jersey to meet his wife, who was recovering from illness. Garfield never made it. Charles Julius Guiteau, a 39-year-old man with a long record of failure and delusion, approached him and fired 2 shots. One struck Garfield in the arm. The other lodged in his back. Garfield survived for weeks. Doctors tried to locate the bullet but made repeated errors. Infection spread. On September 19, 1881, after more than 2 months of suffering, Garfield died in Elberon, New Jersey. His death shocked the nation. Guiteau did not flee. He proclaimed he had saved the Republican Party and acted as an instrument of God. Many Americans were horrified by his calm claim. He was arrested immediately and placed on trial. Why would a man kill a president? Was he driven by politics or madness or both? Guiteau's story gives an answer that is more complex. He was not born evil. His childhood, his isolation, and his troubled mind all shaped him. To understand why he stood in that station in July 1881, we must go back to Freeport, Illinois in 1841, to a boy who would never find a place in the world. Charles Julius Guiteau was born on September 8, 1841 in Freeport, Illinois. His father, Luther W. Guiteau, was a man of strict morals and strong religious beliefs. His mother, Jane Howe, died when Charles was only 7. Her death left the household under Luther's rigid control. Luther worked as a clerk in the United States Land Office and held a reputation for being stern and devout. He believed in harsh discipline. He often criticized his children, pushing them toward religious devotion and hard work. Charles had 3 sisters and 1 brother. Family records show his relationships were strained. His brother Francis later said Charles showed signs of instability from youth. Without a mother's guidance and with a demanding father, Charles grew insecure. He often felt rejected even inside his home. He was described as awkward and withdrawn. Yet he sought approval. He wanted recognition from his father and later from society. In 1859, at age 18, he inherited a small fortune from his grandfather's estate. This gave him an opportunity for education. He enrolled at the University of Michigan's preparatory department. But he struggled with the coursework and never advanced to full enrollment. Students mocked his poor performance. His father was disappointed. Humiliation and rejection marked his early years. This pattern would continue. Guiteau learned to expect failure, but he also grew more desperate to prove his importance. The next stage of his life shows how his search for belonging led him to a radical community in New York. When Charles left Michigan, he looked for purpose elsewhere. In 1860, he traveled to Oneida, New York, where John Humphrey Noyes had founded the Oneida community. This group practiced communal living and shared property. They rejected traditional marriage and promoted complex marriage, meaning that all members were considered spiritually married to one another. The community attracted those searching for new ways of life. Guiteau thought he had found a place where he would be valued. He took the name Charles Guiteau, a play on words that he believed meant, get out of debt, but he struggled to fit in. He was seen as arrogant and unskilled. He avoided manual labor, which the community valued. Members grew frustrated with him. He wrote pamphlets filled with Noyes' teachings but failed to contribute much original thought. He tried to preach within the community but was ignored. Over 6 years, his presence became more strained. By 1866 he left, rejected by those he had hoped would embrace him. The Oneida years deepened his belief in religion as a personal mission. He became convinced God spoke through him. Yet he also experienced isolation and scorn. He tried to prove his importance but failed again. Leaving Oneida, he sought to apply his beliefs in public. He thought he was destined to lead, but he lacked skill and patience. What would happen when a man who believed he was chosen by God continued to be ignored? After leaving Oneida, Charles Guiteau tried one career after another. Each ended in failure. He attempted to practice law in Chicago in the late 1860s. He had studied law books but lacked discipline. He took a few cases but lost most of them. He faced angry clients and lawsuits. He also developed a reputation as dishonest. Next he turned to writing. In 1874 he published The Truth, a book that was almost entirely copied from Noyes's earlier writings. Few copies sold. Critics dismissed it as plagiarism. Guiteau then tried preaching. He delivered sermons in small churches. His style was rambling and egotistical. He claimed to speak God's word, but his audiences found him incoherent. Collections were poor, and he often left towns without paying his debts. Financial troubles mounted. He often lived in boarding houses without paying rent. He borrowed money from family but did not repay it. His wife, Annie Bunn, divorced him in 1874 after years of neglect and abuse. At every turn, Guiteau sought recognition. He wanted to be seen as a lawyer, a writer, a preacher, a leader. But the world treated him as a fraud. He responded not with humility but with stronger claims of divine support. Repeated failure built frustration. Each rejection pushed him deeper into delusion. His path next intersected with politics, where he hoped his fortunes would finally change. Charles Guiteau admired the Republican Party. In the 1870s he identified strongly with the faction known as the Stalwarts, led by Senator Roscoe Conkling of New York. The Stalwarts favored the spoils system, where loyal party members received government jobs. In 1880, during the presidential election, Guiteau wrote a speech in support of Ulysses S. Grant, the stalwart candidate. When James A. Garfield won the Republican nomination instead, Guiteau quickly revised his speech to praise Garfield. He called it Garfield against Hancock, and claimed it was widely circulated, though in truth it was barely noticed. He believed his speech helped Garfield win the presidency. He expected a reward in keeping with the spoils system. After Garfield's victory, Guiteau began visiting government offices in Washington. He asked for a diplomatic post, preferably in Paris. Officials dismissed him. Secretary of State James G. Blaine grew irritated at his repeated requests. "Never speak to me again on the subject," Blaine told him. To Guiteau, this rejection was unbearable. He believed God had chosen him to deliver Garfield to the White House. Now he was ignored. In his mind, allies had turned into rivals. He saw Blaine as an obstacle to God's plan. He saw Garfield as a betrayer of the Stalwarts. When mentors and leaders he admired rejected him, Guiteau concluded only one path remained. By spring 1881, Guiteau was desperate. He lived in cheap boarding houses, often without paying. He carried notes in his pocket about divine missions. He grew convinced that removing Garfield was God's will. He bought a pistol on June 8, 1881. He chose one with an ivory handle because he thought it would look good in a museum after the deed. He practiced at shooting ranges. He also followed Garfield's movements, waiting for the right chance. During this time, he wrote letters to the White House and to military leaders. In them, he said killing Garfield would unite the Republican Party and save the country. He signed them as Charles Guiteau, attorney and counselor at law. On July 2, 1881, he followed Garfield to the train station. The president walked with Secretary Blaine. Guiteau approached from behind and fired. Garfield collapsed. The nation was stunned. This was the turning point. Guiteau's long years of rejection and delusion had turned into violence. He had crossed from words into action. The immediate aftermath showed how he viewed himself not as a criminal, but as a hero of divine mission. After the shooting, Guiteau was seized. He did not resist. He told the officers, "I did it. I will go to jail for it. I am a stalwart." He believed party members would thank him. While Garfield lay in bed, suffering from infection, Guiteau was in jail writing statements and poems. He was confident God approved his action. He asked the government to pay his expenses. He even planned to run for president himself. Doctors treated Garfield poorly. They probed the wound with unwashed hands, causing infection. Alexander Graham Bell built an early metal detector to find the bullet, but doctors used it incorrectly. Garfield's suffering lasted for weeks. His weight dropped. On September 19, 1881, he died. When news spread, Americans were outraged. They saw Guiteau as a murderer. Crowds outside the jail called for his execution. Guiteau still did not see himself as guilty. He said the doctors had killed Garfield, not him. He believed history would vindicate him. His trial would become a national spectacle, mixing law, politics, and questions of sanity. The trial of Charles Guiteau began on November 14, 1881 in Washington, D.C. The presiding judge was Walter S. Cox. Prosecutors charged him with murder. The courtroom was packed with journalists and spectators. Guiteau often interrupted the proceedings. He insulted the prosecutors, argued with the judge, and lectured the jury. He claimed God had inspired him. He argued that he had only shot Garfield and that the doctors had killed him. His defense argued he was insane. At that time, legal standards for insanity required proof the defendant did not know right from wrong. The prosecution insisted Guiteau understood his act. They presented his planning and his letters as evidence. Guiteau often damaged his own case. He gave long speeches about his divine mission. He even proposed to marry one of the prosecution's witnesses. His behavior fascinated the public but convinced the jury he was dangerous. On January 25, 1882, after weeks of testimony, the jury found him guilty. He was sentenced to death by hanging. Guiteau smiled and said, "I expected it." He still believed God would save him at the last moment. As his final days approached, he grew more theatrical, writing poems and singing hymns. The trial of Charles Guiteau was one of the first in American history where insanity was central. Doctors gave conflicting views. Some said he was clearly insane, suffering from delusions. Others said he exaggerated madness to escape punishment. Public opinion was firm. Most Americans wanted him executed. They saw him as a threat to national stability. The new president, Chester A. Arthur, offered no pardon. The case forced Americans to debate how to treat mental illness in law. Was Guiteau responsible for his actions? He had planned the shooting, bought the gun, and followed Garfield. Yet he also believed God directed him and spoke through him. "No one is born evil" fits here. Guiteau was a man with a troubled mind and life of rejection. But the legal system of 1882 judged only whether he knew right from wrong. The jury decided he did. His execution date was set for June 30, 1882. Crowds waited for the event. Newspapers printed every detail. His final days reveal a man still clinging to his sense of divine mission. Charles Guiteau spent his last months in the District of Columbia jail. He continued to write letters and poems. He often sang hymns loudly in his cell. He believed God would intervene to stop his death. On the morning of June 30, 1882, he was led to the gallows. Hundreds of people attended. Reporters recorded every movement. He read a poem he had written, calling himself a martyr. He recited a prayer. He asked the orchestra to play Glory, Hallelujah. At noon the trap was sprung. Guiteau died by hanging. He was 40 years old. Doctors later examined his brain. Some claimed it showed signs of disease. Others saw no proof. Debate over his sanity continued long after his death. The man who wanted to be remembered as a hero was instead remembered as an assassin. His life ended not with triumph but with shame. But his story did not end there. Historians, doctors, and lawyers have continued to debate what his case means. Charles Guiteau's act changed American politics. The assassination of Garfield shocked the nation into reform. The spoils system, which had shaped his delusion of reward, soon collapsed. In 1883, Congress passed the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act, creating exams for federal jobs. His trial shaped debates over insanity in law. Was he mad or evil? Historians often say he suffered from schizophrenia, though the term was not yet used. His case showed the difficulty of judging responsibility when mental illness is involved. He is remembered less as a political figure and more as a case study. His failures in family, education, law, writing, and preaching all shaped his life. His obsession with recognition and belief in divine mission turned into violence. His life shows how neglect, rejection, and illness can twist a person's path. No one is born evil. Guiteau was not born to kill a president. Circumstances, failures, and delusions brought him there. Today, his story is studied in law schools, medical schools, and history classes. It remains a warning of how untreated illness and unmet needs can lead to tragedy. Charles Guiteau's story offers lessons beyond 1881. First, it shows the need to treat mental illness seriously. Guiteau displayed signs of delusion for years. Society mocked him instead of offering help. Second, it shows the danger of systems that encourage personal entitlement. The spoils system made Guiteau believe he was owed a reward. When denied, he turned violent. Third, it shows how rejection and isolation shape people. From his childhood without a mother to his failures in every career, Guiteau felt cast aside. He searched for recognition but never found it. Finally, it reminds us that no one is born evil. Guiteau was not born with a plan to kill. He was a troubled man shaped by family, society, and illness. The question for us is how to prevent similar tragedies today. How do we recognize when someone is spiraling into delusion and violence? His story remains a tragic warning, but also a chance to reflect on how societies treat their most troubled members.